Jack Myers adjusted his hat against the brisk wind that swept through the dense forest on the outskirts of Grayswood. The trees whispered secrets, and the fading sunlight cast long shadows across his path. As a ranger and a former military officer, Jack was no stranger to the solitude of the woods, but tonight the air felt charged, different somehow. Suddenly, a bright streak tore through the evening sky, pulling Jack's gaze upward. His first thought was a meteorite, but it slowed unnaturally before crashing into the forest with a thunderous roar that shook the earth under his feet. "Damn," Jack muttered, grabbing his radio. "This is Myers. I heard a loud crash in the northern sector. Going to check it out?" Static crackled back at him. "Copy that, Jack. Be careful," replied his colleague Mike from the other end. Boots crunching over the underbrush, Jack approached the crash site with caution. The trees around the impact zone were splintered and scorched, and in the center lay a crumpled, oddly shaped vessel, unlike anything Jack had ever seen. "It's not a meteor," Jack murmured, circling the craft. It was sleek, metallic, with symbols etched into its hull that glimmered under his flashlight. "Definitely man-made. Or not," he corrected himself, stepping closer. The hatch was ajar, hissing softly. With a deep breath, Jack pried it open, revealing the dim interior. Inside, he found chaos, broken panels, and flickering lights. And there, amongst the wreckage, was a small, frail figure, stirring weakly. "Hello?" Jack called out gently, stepping inside. The figure flinched, its large, luminous eyes snapping open. They were a vivid, unsettling shade of blue, almost glowing. "I won't hurt you," Jack assured, noticing her tension. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, with a shimmer that seemed almost ethereal. The alien girl tried to speak, her voice a soft melody. "Help, please." Jack reached out slowly, offering his hand. "You're safe now. I'm here to help." Mike arrived, panting, as Jack helped the girl out of the ship. "What in the world?" he gasped, stopping short at the sight of her. "She's from the crash," Jack explained quickly. "We need to get her to safety, figure out where she's from later." The girl clung to Jack as they moved her to their vehicle, her gaze darting around, taking in the unfamiliar sights and sounds of Earth. "I am Enya," she whispered, her voice carrying a weight of sorrow and fear. Jack nodded, driving back towards the town. "I'm Jack, and that's Mike. We'll take care of you, Enya." As they drove, Enya's eyes never left Jack's face. She seemed to be studying him, trying to decipher his intentions. "Why help?" she finally asked, her voice tinged with curiosity and caution. Jack met her gaze in the rearview mirror. "Because it's the right thing to do," he replied simply. Enya pondered his words, her expression unreadable. Meanwhile, Mike radioed ahead, preparing the town for their unusual guest. The road stretched out before them, shrouded in twilight, as Jack drove through the forest, away from the crash site and towards an uncertain future. His mind raced with questions about Enya and her origins. But one thing was clear. Their world had just gotten a lot bigger. In the small, dimly lit room of the town's clinic, Enya sat perched on the edge of a medical bed, her eyes scanning every new face that entered. Dr. Simon Hale, the town's physician, had never encountered a being from another world before, and his curiosity was as high as his concern. "So, Enya, can you tell me where you're from?" Dr. Hale asked, trying to keep his voice even as he adjusted his glasses, looking over his notes. Enya looked up, her luminous blue eyes reflecting a mix of hesitance and trust. "Orin," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Was from Orin." Jack stood by her side, arms crossed, observing the interaction. "What happened on Orin, Enya? Why did you leave?" Her gaze fell to her hands, folded neatly in her lap. "Orin does not suffer difference. I am different. My abilities, they feared. They exiled me." Her words were clipped, each one dropping like a stone into the silence of the room. Dr. Hale noted everything down, then offered her a small, reassuring smile. "Well, you're safe here, Enya. We don't fear differences in Grayswood." Enya looked up, a faint glimmer of something hopeful in her eyes. "Thank you, Simon Jack," she said, testing their names on her tongue. Outside the clinic, Jack and Dr. Hale stepped aside for a quiet conversation. "She's been through a lot, Jack. Physically, she seems fine, but who knows the emotional toll," Dr. Hale mused, glancing back at Enya through the glass door. Jack nodded, his brow furrowed. "We need to keep this quiet, Simon. The less people know about her, the better, at least until we figure out more." I agree. But you know how small towns work. It won't take long for people to start asking questions about the crash, Simon replied, his voice tinged with concern. Back inside, Enya remained seated, lost in thought. Suddenly, the door opened again, and Mike stepped in, his expression serious. Jack, we might have a problem. Some folks noticed the commotion at the crash site. Rumors are already starting. Jack sighed, rubbing his temples. Okay, let's manage this carefully. Enya, would you be okay staying here for a bit longer, just until we figure out a safe place for you? Enya nodded, her face an unreadable mask. Yes, I can stay. I do not require much. As night deepened over Grayswood, the trio made plans. Jack decided to take Enya to his cabin in the woods, a secluded spot that would offer safety and a chance for Enya to recover and adjust in peace. Before they left, Dr. Hale handed Jack a small bag of supplies. Take care of her, Jack, and keep me posted. Jack placed a gentle hand on Enya's back as they walked to his truck parked outside. The streets were quiet, with only the moon watching over them. Jack? Enya's voice was tentative as they drove away from the town. Yes, Enya? Why do you help me, even though it brings you trouble? She asked, her gaze fixed on the dark road ahead. Jack smiled, glancing at her. Because, Enya, sometimes you find yourself in the right place at the right time to make a difference. For you, I'm willing to take that chance. Enya pondered his words, her face softening. You are different too, Jack, she said quietly, a note of admiration in her voice. As they reached the cabin, the woods enveloped them in its silent, watchful embrace. Jack knew challenges lay ahead, but for now they had a refuge, a small slice of peace amid the brewing storm. Jack's cabin, nestled deep within the woods of Grayswood, stood as a solitary sentinel among towering pines. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of pine and earth, a stark contrast to the sterile confines of Enya's alien world. As they approached the cabin, Enya looked around with wide eyes, taking in the serene, untouched environment. This is your home? Enya asked, her voice mixed with wonder and a hint of unease as she stepped out of the truck. It's one of them, Jack replied with a chuckle, leading her up this wooden steps to the front door. I spend a lot of time out here. It's quiet. Helps me think. Inside, the cabin was rustic but well-maintained. The living room was cozy, dominated by a stone fireplace and surrounded by comfortable furniture. Jack showed Enya around, explaining the basics of the cabin, from how to use the kitchen appliances to the water system. Enya listened intently, her head tilting occasionally as she absorbed everything. Your world. It is very different from Orin. It feels free, she observed, her fingers brushing against the books lined up on a shelf. Yeah, Earth has its problems, but there's beauty too, Jack said, noticing her interest in the books. Feel free to read any of these if you like. As the evening wore on, Jack prepared a simple dinner, showing Enya how to cook. She was a quick learner, fascinated by the process of seasoning and tasting. They sat down together at the small dining table, and for a moment, the cabin felt like a home filled with life and laughter. This is very different from the food on Orin, Enya said, sampling a piece of grilled chicken with a curious expression. There is warmth in it. That's probably the pepper, Jack joked, earning a puzzled look from Enya before she realized the humor and smiled. After dinner, they sat by the fireplace, the flames casting dancing shadows around the room. Enya seemed more relaxed, the glow from the fire reflecting in her eyes. Enya, if you're comfortable sharing, what are these abilities you mentioned? The ones that scared your people? Jack asked, his tone gentle to avoid pressing too hard. Enya looked into the fire, her face somber. I can sense emotions, manipulate energy fields, she began hesitantly. On Orin, this is seen as an aberration, a danger to the ordered society. That sounds more like a gift than a curse, Jack mused, watching her closely. To you, maybe. To them, I was a threat to be contained. Her voice was bitter, but Jack noticed the ease with which she spoke to him, an ease that seemed to grow with each passing moment. They spent the rest of the evening discussing Earth and Orin, finding both similarities and vast differences. Jack realized that despite the initial fears and prejudices, Earth could learn much from Enya. As night deepened, Jack prepared the guest room for her. You can stay here as long as you need, Enya. This place is safe. Thank you, Jack. For everything, Enya said, standing at the doorway of her new room. I never expected kindness from a stranger, especially not from a human. Jack smiled, feeling a sense of responsibility and protectiveness he hadn't anticipated. Get some rest. We'll figure out the next steps tomorrow. As he retreated to his room, Jack felt a change in the air, a sense that this unexpected chapter in his life was just beginning, and that Enya, the alien girl everyone else had abandoned, might just redefine what it meant to be human. As the first light of dawn seeped through the forest, casting long shadows on the cabin floor, Jack's thoughts were disrupted by the unexpected buzzing of his old military communicator, an artifact from his service days that he seldom used. Frowning, he picked it up. The message was cryptic, but alarming. Unidentified signals detected near Grayswood. Proceed with caution. Jack's instincts, honed through years of military experience, kicked into high gear. He turned to Enya, who was quietly observing a pair of sparrows flitting about outside the window. Looks like we might have company sooner than we thought, he informed her. Enya's expression shifted, the innocence of her morning curiosity replaced by a dawning seriousness. They've found me, she said, her voice barely a whisper, but laden with a heavy resignation. Without another word, Jack began to pack essentials into a backpack. Water, food, first aid supplies, and an old map. We need to leave now. We'll head deeper into the woods. There's a network of caves I used to explore as a kid. We can hide there. Enya nodded, assisting silently, her movements swift and precise despite her unfamiliarity with the task. Within minutes, they were out the back door, blending into the dense foliage that surrounded Jack's cabin. The forest was a maze of towering pines and thick underbrush, a natural barrier that Jack was grateful for as they made their stealthy retreat. Every snapped twig or rustled leaf put him on edge, a stark reminder that each sound could betray their position. Meanwhile, a team led by Commander Varric, a high-ranking official from Enya's home planet, landed at the site of her crashed ship. Clad in a suit that shimmered with a metallic sheen, Varric scanned the area with a device that hummed softly. The signal ends here. She's close, he announced to his team, a group of similarly dressed figures. Back in the forest, Jack and Enya paused briefly under the cover of an ancient oak. Jack checked his compass, then peered through the trees toward a distant ridge. Once we get to the caves, we can hold up there until we figure out a longer-term plan. Enya, catching her breath, looked back in the direction they had come. I never wanted to bring danger here, to your world, she said, her eyes filled with turmoil. Jack placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We deal with our problems together now, and right now, our best chance is to stay one step ahead of them. They resumed their trek, moving as quietly as possible. After an hour, they reached the mouth of a cave hidden behind a waterfall. The sound of the water crashing down masked their movements, a natural concealment that Jack was thankful for. Inside, the cave was dark and damp. Jack pulled out a flashlight and led the way to a wider chamber where they could rest. Setting down his pack, he looked over at Enya, who was staring at the cave walls, her face pale in the flashlight's beam. This is only temporary, he assured her. We just need to stay hidden until we can make contact with some of my old contacts. They can help us get you to safety. Enya nodded, sinking down against the cold stone. Your world. It's beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Jack sat beside her, his back against the same cold stone. That's a fair description, he agreed, managing a half smile. But you're not alone here, Enya. Remember that. Outside, as Varric's team moved methodically through the forest, their advanced technology scanning every inch, the two fugitives inside the cave prepared for what was to come, unaware of just how close their pursuers were. Jack and Enya's temporary refuge within the cave provided a solemn kind of sanctuary, though both knew it was merely a prelude to more difficult challenges. As they sat in the dim light of Jack's flashlight, the reality of their situation settled over them like the heavy, cold air of the cave. We'll need to move again soon, Jack said, checking his watch. They'll have trackers and dogs, maybe even drones by now. Enya nodded, her face drawn and weary. On Orin, they use seekers, machines that can detect energy signatures. I'm afraid if they have something similar here, we'll deal with it, Jack reassured her, though his mind raced with contingency plans. For now, we keep moving, stay off the grid. By nightfall, they ventured out of the cave, moving under the cover of the forest's dense canopy. The moon was a thin crescent, barely lighting their path, which was both a curse and a blessing. They made slow progress, pausing frequently to listen for any signs of pursuit. Back in Grayswood, Commander Varric's forces had established a temporary base, utilizing technology that seemed otherworldly to the few locals who caught glimpses of it. Lights flickered from handheld devices, casting eerie glows on the faces of the alien soldiers as they coordinated their search. Varric stood before a holographic map, his finger tracing routes and points. "Expand the search radius. I want night drones covering these sectors," he commanded, his voice firm and devoid of emotion. In a makeshift command center, Mike and a group of Jack's former military buddies monitored the situation. Using old contacts and a few favors, Mike had managed to get his hands on some rudimentary counter-surveillance equipment. "They're using high-frequency signals for communication," one of the team members, Sarah, announced as she adjusted the settings on a signal jammer. "If we can disrupt their comms, we might buy some time." Mike nodded. "Do it. Anything to give Jack and that girl a fighting chance." The disruption worked temporarily, causing confusion among Varric's forces. This gave Jack and Enya the opportunity to cross a clearing and reach an old ranger station that Jack knew was abandoned. Inside, they found a moment's respite. As they entered the station, Jack went straight to an old radio set that he used during his ranger days. "This might still work, if I can send out a coded message," he mumbled, turning dials. Enya, meanwhile, stood by a dusty window, her eyes scanning the dark horizon. "They will not give up easily," she said, her voice low. "They believe I hold information that could change the balance of power on Orin." Jack looked over at her, the radio momentarily forgotten. "What kind of information?" Enya hesitated, then sighed. "Prophecies, Jack. I was seen as a conduit for ancient prophecies. Dangerous knowledge in the wrong hands." Before Jack could respond, the sound of approaching engines cut through the night. They both froze, then moved quickly, extinguishing any light inside the station. Outside, the alien search team approached, their forms silhouetted against the headlights of their vehicles. Varric stepped out, his eyes scanning the station with a calculated gaze. Jack and Enya crouched behind a counter, barely daring to breathe. Jack held a finger to his lips, signaling silence as footsteps echoed on the wooden porch outside. "We know you're in there," Varric's voice boomed, strangely amplified. "Surrender, and we will spare you further conflict." Jack exchanged a glance with Enya, his expression resolute. "Stay down," he whispered, before standing, his hands raised as he stepped into the doorway. As Jack confronted the alien commander, buying time with his words, Enya slipped out the back, moving to a position where she could potentially disrupt their plans. Her heart pounded, not just with fear, but with a growing resolve to protect her new friend and the planet that was becoming her sanctuary. Under the cloak of darkness, Jack faced Commander Varric with a steely calm that belied the adrenaline coursing through his veins. His hands remained raised in a universal gesture of surrender, his eyes locked on the alien commander's unyielding gaze. "Commander Varric, I assume?" Jack began, his voice steady. "I know you want her, but you're on Earth now. There are rules, laws." "Your laws are irrelevant to us," Varric interrupted coldly. "We seek only the return of what is rightfully ours. Hand over the girl, and we will depart your planet peacefully." Jack hesitated, weighing his words carefully. "She's under my protection. Any harm to her is an act of war against this planet." Varric scoffed, a sound that seemed to carry disdain for all of humanity. "You cannot protect her forever, human." Meanwhile, Enya, using the darkness as her ally, circled around to the back of the alien convoy. Her heart pounded with a mix of fear and anger. She knew the implications of her next actions could be dire, but the betrayal they faced, both from her own people and the looming threat from within the human community, left her no choice. Back at the makeshift command center, Mike and his team listened in through an old surveillance system they'd managed to set up. The tension was palpable. Each member knew the stakes were high, not just for Jack and Enya, but for the entire town. Suddenly, a new voice crackled through their communications gear. It was Ted, one of the locals who'd been vocally skeptical about harboring an alien. "Mike, you there? We got a problem," Ted said, urgency lacing his tone. "What's going on?" Mike responded, his brow furrowed. "It's the town council. They've voted to hand her over. They think it'll protect us from further incidents. They're on their way to the station now," Ted disclosed, his voice a mixture of frustration and apology. Mike cursed under his breath. "Stay on them, Ted. Don't let them do anything until I give the word." Back at the ranger station, Jack's standoff with Varric continued. Just as the tension reached a breaking point, headlights pierced the night, and a convoy of local vehicles approached, led by Mayor Johnson, a man driven more by fear than duty. "Jack, stand down," Mayor Johnson shouted as he stepped out of his vehicle, his face tense. Jack turned slowly, his expression one of disbelief, You're making a mistake, Johnson. You can't just hand her over. She's not one of us, Jack. We have to think about the town's safety, the mayor argued, his voice echoing the fear that had gripped the community. Varric watched the exchange with a predatory interest, a smirk playing on his lips. It seems your own kind betrays you, human. In the shadows, unnoticed by the others, Enya made her move. Drawing on her ability to manipulate energy, she created a diversion, a sudden burst of light and a concussive sound that disoriented everyone momentarily. Using the chaos to her advantage, she grabbed Jack's arm. We need to go. Now! Jack nodded, understanding immediately. They slipped away in the confusion, heading deeper into the forest, guided by Enya's subtle manipulation of the light around them to mask their escape. Behind them, the town's betrayal and the alien threat merged into a single, chilling reality. The night air was thick with tension and unspoken fears as Jack and Enya vanished into the darkness, the weight of their uncertain future pressing down upon them. The betrayal had cut deep, but it also cemented a new resolve in them both, to protect each other and fight back against the oppression that sought to claim them. Under the cover of darkness, Jack and Enya hurried away from the ranger station, their hearts racing as the sounds of confusion faded behind them. The forest, usually a place of solitude and peace for Jack, now felt like a labyrinth of shadows and dangers, each snap of a twig a potential threat. We'll head to the old mine, Jack whispered, guiding Enya through the underbrush. It's been abandoned for decades, but there's a network of tunnels that could hide us for a while. Enya nodded, following close, her senses heightened by the urgency of their escape. Despite the fear, she felt a surge of gratitude for Jack, who had risked everything to protect her. As they reached the mine, hidden by overgrown foliage and the remnants of a once bustling operation, Jack carefully removed the old padlock with tools he'd cleverly stashed months ago for emergencies. They slipped inside, the musty air of the tunnels enveloping them as they descended into the earth. Meanwhile, Commander Varric regrouped his forces, his face a mask of frustration. Fan out and find them, he ordered sharply. They can't have gone far. Back in Grayswood, Mike and his team monitored the situation, scrambling to intercept any alien communications. Sarah, sitting before a bank of screens, suddenly perked up. Got something, she announced, tapping into the alien frequency. They're moving towards the east sector, away from the mine. Good, Mike responded, relief in his voice. That buys us some time. Deep within the mine, Jack led Enya to a small chamber where old mining equipment lay scattered. He pulled out a couple of worn blankets from his backpack and handed one to Enya. We'll stay here until daylight. Then we need to find a more permanent solution. Enya wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, her eyes meeting Jack's in the dim light. Your friends, Mike and Sarah, you trust them? With my life, Jack replied without hesitation. They'll help us. As they settled in for the night, miles away, Varric's troops scoured the forest, their sophisticated sensors pinging softly in the silent night. Unbeknownst to them, a small group led by Mike was closing in, their movements stealthy and calculated. Mike had organized a rescue operation not just to extract Jack and Enya, but also to deliver a significant blow to the alien invaders. Armed with homemade EMP devices and a deep knowledge of the terrain, Mike's team positioned themselves around the aliens' temporary base. Just before dawn, they struck. The EMP devices, crude but effective, disabled the alien technology temporarily, causing chaos. As the aliens scrambled, Mike's team moved in, using the confusion to their advantage. Simultaneously, Jack was awakened by the distant sounds of disruption. He nudged Enya, who had managed a few hours of restless sleep. It's time to move, he said quietly. They left the mine, navigating through the tunnels and emerging into the chilly morning air just as Mike and his team rendezvoused with them at a prearranged location. Jack, Enya, you're both okay? Mike asked, his gaze quickly scanning them for injuries. We are, thanks to you, Jack replied, clapping his friend on the shoulder. Enya, still wary but feeling an unfamiliar sense of safety, looked at the group. Thank you, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. Mike nodded, then turned to Jack. We've got a window of opportunity. Their systems are down, but it won't last. We need to get you to a safe house. As they hurried away from the mine, the first light of dawn painted the sky with streaks of gold and crimson. Behind them, Varric's forces regrouped, their temporary setback only fueling their determination. But for now, Jack and Enya had a reprieve, a brief moment to breathe and plan their next move in the struggle for freedom and safety. The safe house was an old, abandoned farm located several miles outside of Grayswood. Surrounded by dense woods and overgrown fields, it offered the perfect hideout for Jack, Enya, and their allies. As they arrived, the first rays of the morning sun broke through the trees, casting long shadows and a sense of temporary peace. Inside, the atmosphere was tense but hopeful. Sarah was already setting up communication equipment, her fingers moving quickly over the keys as she established a secure line. "We've got limited time. Their tech will be back up soon," she warned, her eyes focused on the screen. Jack nodded, turning to Enya. "We'll need to make some decisions quickly. It's not just about hiding anymore. We need a long-term plan." Enya, looking around the rustic confines of the farm, felt a mix of fear and determination. "I can't keep running, Jack. Not just for my sake, but for Earth's too. If they keep coming, it will only bring more danger here." Mike joined the conversation, his expression serious. "We've made contact with other groups who are willing to stand with us. This isn't just a local problem anymore. It's global." Jack absorbed the news with a slow nod. "Then it's settled. We make our stand here. We show them that Earth is not just their hunting ground." Over the next few days, they prepared. Jack and Mike trained some of the locals in basic defense tactics, turning the farm into a fortified camp. Enya, meanwhile, shared more about her abilities, teaching those willing to learn how to shield their minds from the alien sensors. The community around them, once fearful and skeptical, began to rally. News of their resistance spread, bolstering support from unexpected quarters. Earth was uniting, a patchwork of different people with a common cause. Then, the day came when the skies darkened with alien ships, a clear sign that the final confrontation was imminent. The defenders took their positions, their faces set with grim determination. As the ships landed, Commander Varric emerged, flanked by his elite guard. He faced the farm, where Jack, Enya, and their makeshift army stood ready. "This is your last chance," Varric called out, his voice amplified. "Surrender the anomaly, and we will leave your world in peace." Jack stepped forward, Enya by his side. "This is her home now, and these are her people. You have no power here anymore." Enya took a deep breath, stepping ahead of Jack. "I was once afraid of what I am, but no more. You seek to control, but you will find only resistance here." The standoff was tense until Enya raised her hands, her eyes glowing with an ethereal light. The ground beneath the alien forces trembled, and a gust of wind swept across the field, knocking the invaders off balance. Confusion reigned among Varric's troops, giving the defenders the advantage. The battle was fierce, earth and sky alive with the clash of human courage and alien technology. When the dust settled, the alien forces were decimated, their will broken. Commander Varric, defeated, signaled a retreat. As the alien ships withdrew into the sky, the defenders of Earth let out a triumphant cheer. They had protected their home, their freedom, their right to exist as they chose. Later, as they watched the ships disappear, Jack turned to Enya. "Looks like you're stuck with us now." Enya smiled, her earlier reservations faded, replaced by a new sense of belonging. "I think I am where I belong," she agreed. As they walked back to the farm, the community came out to meet them, their faces bright with victory and newfound respect for the once mysterious alien girl. Earth had stood alone, but it stood victorious, its people united by a common cause they never expected to face.